Have Matt run the numbers, and we are going to have Josh give a little tidbit about any artists that are new this week. Now, we will not, after saying all that, we will not be doing it about the Talking Heads, because this is the second time we're covering the Talking Heads. We covered their first album, Talking Heads 77, 2 weeks ago. And now we're going to be doing this, which is their second album. So you can hear a little bit of our context in that episode. But Matt, please run the numbers. And you know what? Why don't you go ahead and take the first take, like you're Stephen A. Smith over there, spitting knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what to say to that, but I'm just going to go into it. All right, so this is more songs about buildings and food. Comes in at number 143 in the 1970s on Best Ever Albums, number 10 in 1978, number 598 of all time. It did make Rolling Stone's list at number 364, and these are more songs by the Talking Heads that I enjoyed. This is kind of picking off of what we heard with Talking Heads 77, and I didn't really know. I've only listened to these albums really once each, and even though back to back, it's there's not a ton of distinction I'm making between these two. I would reiterate what I said about Talking Head 77, which is that I like the mix of kind of the poppy melodic nature of their music, but also throwing in like the art rock, some avant-garde stuff, some discordant either notes or offbeat, drum beats, things like that. So it's certainly an interesting band. This album did seem a little bit more produced, I found.
Well, you want to know why?
Production. Probably because like Brian Eno or somebody.
Exactly. It's the first of 3 albums that Brian Eno produced.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say, I noticed a lot different, Matt, between these two, but I'll wait for my take on that, yeah.
Well, and that's where I feel like it's hard for me to, with these one listens, it's my memory wasn't jogged to the point where I was like, wow, this is totally different. It sounds like a Talking Heads album, right? And even though most of the songs were songs I did not know, I think maybe Take Me to the River was the only song.
That's the big hit off of this one.
Yeah, and that's right. And that's not even their song. I looked up, I was like, they did that song, and they didn't do that song. I mean
that's an Al Green song, right?
Yeah. Yes, it is Al Green's song. So I was like, okay, well, I also knew that from the Fish. Remember that Fish? Was that Buddy the Talking Fish, the thing on the wall or whatever? You push the button and
Big Mouth Billy Bass.
That's it. Thank you, John. And that was one of the songs that he sang. So I always think of that.
That's very formal. Big Mouth Billy Bass.
Yeah. I always think of that stupid thing whenever I hear that song. So, but yeah, I think I'm very excited to get into more Talking Heads, and I think that this is kind of where I would like to have listened to this album more. But I thought that stuff like songs that stood out. I think Stay Hungry stood out. That's one of the first things I said, geez, the song sounds freaking good. It's just a lot of the interplay of the instruments I think is just fantastic. There's a lot going on, and these are good. This is a good album to listen to with headphones, because I think one of the things I would like to do in listening to some of these Talking Heads albums again would be to listen for specific instruments and kind of just focus on that, because at times it seems like there's things that they're doing that seem like they don't fit, like they're kind of doing their own thing, but they do. And so that was a song that in particular that I was listening to the different guitar parts and the bass and the drums at separate parts. And I really thought that was a cool way to listen to this. So that's something that I would like to do. It's almost like that song was almost turned into like kind of like a jam band song, because there was a lot of instrumentation. And it's actually one of those songs that made me go, shoot, I wish this went on longer. They kind of cut it a little short. But I thought that they were finding a good groove with that song in particular. So Stay Hungry is one that stood out to me as being one of the stronger songs. I like the first track as well. And that kind of reminded me a little bit, that song is called Thank You for Sending Me an Angel. It's got this galloping intro. It's kind of,
it's really rapid.
Yeah, a little anthemic, and it actually reminds me a little bit, because they kind of started with this sound, and they kind of kept it going throughout, just kind of like on repeat. And it reminded me for some reason a little bit of something like that LCD Sound System would do. Obviously, I don't think it was as electronic, but they do like this. They do this, the repetition and the beats behind it reminded me something that if they layered maybe more electronics on it or something like that, I could see something like LCD Sound System kind of taking something like that and running with it. A song, that would kind of just keep that part going. So, But yeah, there's some funk in here. Like Found a Job, it's got a little funky bass line going
Without
on.
Love, I noticed too, had some funk.
Yeah, and John, I'm glad I was remembering what you said about I forget her name, the bass player from the Talking
Tina
Heads.
Weymouth.
Tina Weymouth, but you said, I think you said that she has some tasty bass lines and
Tasty lines.
tasty bass lines, and I was picking up a lot of that on this album. So that was something that I was
the whole rhythm section.
Yeah.
on this.
I noticed that too.
Yeah, so I really like the Talking Heads. I think the rest of the albums that we cover for them are going to be proper albums. This is their 6th highest rated album, by the way, on Best Ever Albums.
Wow.
Just behind Talking Heads 77. So we're going to be covering 4 other ones that actually may crack the top 100. So I'm going to be excited to listen to those, to get more into them and to learn a little bit more about their story. But yeah, I'm getting the feeling that Talking Heads are going to be one of those bands that, looking back on this whole podcast, that it's going to be a much greater appreciation for, and I could see myself listening to them for many, many years to come.
They'll go from like outside, like a band you didn't know, like, and creep into like your top 20 type situation.
I mean, I don't know about top 20, but up there. And I think, because most of the stuff that I knew from them were singles, right? And I liked them fine, but again, I never had that moment in my life where I was like, I got a Talking Heads album and got into it, or had a friend that was really, encouraging me to do so. But just these 2 albums, just on these 2 listens with these 2 records, I'm very, very impressed.
What is your favorite song on the album, Matt?
Well, the one I wrote the most notes on was Stay Hungry, so I'm going to go with that one.
Okay. And do you have an impression of if you like this album or the other one more? Just by gut. I know it's only one listen. But.
I think I had a stronger positive reaction to Talking Head 77 over this one. So based on that, I'm going to go with that one.
Gotcha. So yeah, it was. Is it my turn? I'll go.
It is.
Sure.
Okay. Go for it.
So again, this is another high quality album from them. I think they are one of these bands that we're going to find out, or if you already know, is that they make consistently quality albums. And so there's like no dip in quality. There's no sophomore slump here. There's no, just a one-hit wonder type of, or one-hit album type of band. I think their output is going to be consistently good. And I see that here in this album. The things I noticed are this seems tightened up a lot and more like dance focused. I feel like David Byrne is less of a presence here, or he's like kind of reined in a little bit. I think he's not out in front as much, and I think the music is taking more of a focus, which I appreciated. I think they did a good job. As much as I like David Byrne, I think he is good and like balanced in this album. I think. And like Matt, I hadn't heard any of these songs before except for Take Me to the River, and I was really impressed with it. I think my favorite song is The Good Thing, which is the 3rd track. That has a really catchy tempo to it, and there's hand claps in it, which I always love, and the overall feel of this album is really upbeat and joyful. The lyrical content is still kind of quirky and off the wall, if you couldn't tell by the title of the album. I mean, the funniest example would be what is it? Sorry, I can't see.
Artists Only?
Yeah, Found a Job, about a couple of like people in the TV industry. I thought that I was reading the lyrics to that while I was listening to the song. Also, The Girls Want to Be with the Girls. That was really funny, lyric wise. And yeah, like you guys noticed, I really paid attention to the drums and bass this time around, and I thought they were really tight and on point. And I noticed some like really quick drum fills that were really good, like I'm Not in Love. I noticed it on, and the bass lines were also really good. So it's another big thumbs up from me. Talking Heads deserves re-listens. It would be one of those. I mean, I guess we're gonna do a bio on them at some point, but it would be good to re-listen to these again.
We'll do multiple in the 80s full length, just as an FYI. Yeah. So, I really like this one. I actually like this one better than I like 77, to be quite honest.
I think I do too. Yeah.
I think that the production that Eno put on this is the secret sauce to taking the strengths of David Byrne. Like, I've heard the Talking Heads described this way, and so this is not an original thought, but it also, while it's not an original thought, it's also something that came to my mind before I'd heard it as a non-original thought, if that makes sense. So, and that's that, the Talking Heads have this very funky and a lot of times danceable rhythm section and guitar, like angular guitar, and then you've got like this nervous energy from David Byrne, and it's such an interesting dynamic, like sort of his frantic, nervous presence on albums mixed with the music. But I think that the best Talking Head songs are where you have a good balance, and even maybe tipping a little bit more into the music than the David Byrne piece. I thought in 77, every once in a while, there was a little bit too much of David Byrne up front, and it kind of went a little bit too far at times. This one, I never felt that way. I always felt like his voice really complemented the rest of the things. Now, in the Big Country, the end of it, that's very much him in front, but it's a very interesting Talking Head song, isn't it? Lyrically, it's him in a plane, right, writing about parts of the country. Sometimes not pleasantly. It's kind of like he's looking at it and imagining it. And then you've got the Al Green cover, so they're kind of their own two-piece at the end of the album. The first 9 tracks, as Josh said, and he could have been stealing my notes, I felt like there was a lot more of an emphasis on the rhythm section up front, both in production as well as also the sound of the songs, and a danceability to it. I didn't hear much of what would become like the Tom Tom Club part of the Talking Heads as much in 77. I heard it a lot more in this album. I also heard a lot more of what I associate with the Talking Heads sort of 80s sound a little bit more on this. It's where it's the art rock mixed with the dance. They do they're an interesting band in that they can write off-kilter guitar parts, but never where they veer into like the unaccessible art rock. And that's another thing I'd say about this album. I think it's a little bit more accessible than 77. Like, this is an album where many of the songs I could see being played on like terrestrial radio, and not being out of place. Now, my favorite song on this album was Warning Sign. I really like sort of the collage of sounds on that, and I find that we're starting to get to art rock bands that have noise rock qualities at times, and we'll talk about another band that's even more like that. But I'm starting to see, if we talk about things like proto pop and proto punk and stuff like that, that isn't necessarily what I'm saying here. I'm seeing proto some other sounds that are clearly 80s sounds, and the art rock that is in the 80s indie, a little bit of like shoegaze and noise rock. But then the Talking Heads, the interesting thing that they have going for them is they have this very like funky vibe to them that is not what you'd associate with those sounds. And I think that is sort of the calling card for the Talking Heads. I'm finding that they maintain almost like that David Bowie 70s level funk sound that he had, but and the art rock stuff, but with a decidedly ahead of its time 80s indie feel to it, and a little bit like dirtier at times. And so I really like this album. I thought the first 9 songs were uniformly strong. Like I said before, I think songs 10 and 11, Take Me to the River and The Big Country, almost are their own couplet of songs that are really good to have on the album, but represent a different vibe and place on the album as well. So it was kind of like two interesting albums for me, a 9 album one, and then almost like a CD single, like Take Me to the River with like The Big Country on the back of it, the type of thing you'd see on the front of things. So yeah, this was strong recommend for me, and it's going to be very interesting to see if I agree with the future albums being stronger, because there isn't much more ceiling that I see for 4 albums. You know what I mean? It's like, ooh, right. I wonder what 4 albums worth of ceiling above this looks like.
Well, that's why I'm excited too, because it's like, man, we're just scratching the surface here. So, and we actually will be covering one of those albums in like a couple weeks, because one of them is from 1970s.
If I'm to be really honest right here, I only know a few more Talking Heads songs, like Burning Down the House and Once in a Lifetime. And yes, and a couple of Tom Tom Club songs. So this isn't going to be one where I'm able to have a lot of like touch every one of these albums. And those are on different albums. So every one of these albums is going to have mostly new material for me. So I'm actually very excited because I'm not going to be coming in with any sort of authoritative voice for a band that's not exactly abstract either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I get the sense, and you guys can chime in if you don't agree or not, that maybe they're finding their sound more on this album. I think before it was clear that, all right, this is like a reggae influence song. This is like a funk influence song. I think they're kind of incorporating those more subtly, or at least like narrowing in on what they want. But again, that may be reaching.
I don't disagree.
Okay.
But again, I wasn't thinking about those things when I was listening to it. So again,
I need to see if the Talking Head sound congeals to a true Talking Head sound, or if they're one of these bands that has certain elements like David Byrne's voice and Tina Weymouth's bass sounds, the structure of her bass lines, and then the rapid fills mixed with like the jazz type drumming that's being done here, or if it's going to be more like you said on the first album where they were, playing around with different sounds. Because I know David Byrne's solo career jumps all over the place, so we'll see.
It wouldn't surprise me if that was the case, though, Josh, and I think because it makes sense that that's what bands are trying to do, particularly when they hone their craft a little bit more, they get some better production, they learn a little bit about what works, maybe what doesn't as much, and, they grow. So that wouldn't surprise me if that's the case.
All right. Any final thoughts?
Sounds like 3 unanimous positive reviews.
For sure. Yep. And we're going to be doing Fear of Music. That's from 1979. That's their second highest rated album.
Okay.
On Best Ever Album. So we will be covering that in 4 episodes, 4 traditional episodes. So 2 months from now.
7